watching CramerSez. Welcome. My name is Kramer. This is the CramerSez Project. It is Monday, March 24th. Welcome to the show. We got a lot going on. You've got Doge exposing more and more waste, fraud, and abuse. You've got Tom Homan down at the border rounding up the illegals and deporting them. And then we learned this, that our banks and investment firms, these financial wizards, they've done it to us again. We have another 2008 financial crisis on our doorstep.
Yeah, basically, I was down in Austin with Ian, actually, and I was doing a bunch of research on private equity. That's mostly what I talk about on my channel. Okay. I do deep dives on it. And I was doing some research on why Joann's craft store was going out of business. Didn't make any sense to me.
I love Joann's.
Everybody who crafts anything loves Joann's. And any crafter doesn't want to buy something online. We want to touch it. Yeah. We want to make sure we can see what it is. So it's the one retail store where you're not going to get us buying stuff online. Mm-hmm. They gained 9.5 million new customers since COVID.
Wow.
97% of their stores were cash positive, and I wanted to know why they were closing down.
Wow.
And I found an article, really obscure Financial Times article, that said it was their back floating rate debt. I'm like, what the hell is that?
That's Tiffany Cianci. We'll talk to her about this issue and more next on the CramerSez Project.
You're watching the CramerSez Project.
Global news with local views.
From the halls of Congress
Across the nation.
and around the globe.
You're getting the latest news and conservative views.
You're watching the CramerSez Project.
Global news with local views.
CramerSez returns after this message from our partners.
Introducing Tusk,
With Tusk, you get uncensored news and secure browsing.
all while protecting your privacy.
Choose the news you trust and take control of your internet.
Join the free speech revolution with Tusk.
Download Tusk today at tuskbrowser.com.
The CramerSez Project is back.
With global news and local views.
You're watching the CramerSez Project.
You're watching CramerSez. Back in 2008, we went through a financial crisis in this country because of the banks, and they'd given themselves a bunch of loans, dirty money, and then they got all their money back, and then they left us the bill. That's basically happened again. My guest today is Tiffany Cianci. Tiffany has been covering this issue for a while and had a video here in the last couple of weeks that went viral explaining what's going on. Tiffany, welcome to the show. Give us a little background about who you are and how all this started.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me on. My name is Tiffany Cianci, and I am a small business advocate that does a lot of small business advocacy in Washington, D.C., and in states all around the United States. I work in legislatures, in houses, and testifying before the Federal Trade Commission, before Congress. But before all of that, I was a small business owner that was targeted by private equity and terrorized through lawfare by a private equity firm for being the president of a union that represented other small business owners. And so today I do research. I take deep dives into private equity scandals, scams, debt loading, leverage buyouts, and I fight for the little guy.
In the last couple of weeks here, you've been everywhere. You've talked to Robert Kennedy Jr., you've been on the Tim Pool Show and others. The statement that you made in your video that went viral is that we are at a 2008 type of event or worse. How did you come to that?
Honestly, I have, for the last several years, tracked all of the private equity bankruptcies that have taken place through leverage buyouts. I track all kinds of bankruptcies, but through the Small Business Association, the SBA, and through the Financial Times and two other mechanisms that allow you to track bankruptcies, I noticed that bankruptcies in private equity owned or backed corporations was accelerating at a really expeditious pace. It wasn't like a fluke type of year or something that looked like an anomaly, like COVID was clearly an anomaly year in bankruptcies. It was an extreme acceleration. And so last year was the second highest bankruptcy year on record. This past year was the highest bankruptcy year on record for private equity backed firms, and they doubled the next closest non-anomaly year. And my biggest concern was that a lot of those corporations that were being bankrupted didn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Like private equity historically always is more likely to bankrupt a corporation because they're vampires.
Right.
I don't have a better way to put it. They only create wealth, and they only create wealth for a few people. They literally suck the life out of communities, corporations, workforces, and they funnel all of that life, all of that wealth into the hands of a very few. That is what they do. But in this instance, I was noticing that corporations that were still relatively healthy financially,
Right.
aside from the debt they had stacked on top of them.
And Joanne Fabrics is one of those.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm a sewer, and I know Joanne's Fabrics. And Joanne's Fabrics was absolutely one of them, where a year ago they filed for bankruptcy protection, a Chapter 11, but all of their stores, which fortunately once they file bankruptcy, you get to see their documents.
Right.
Then it's federally available. Otherwise, it lives in a private equity black box. And in this instance, 97% of the stores were profitable. That is an astronomical number for retail in the current market. And so knowing that 97% of the stores were profitable, knowing that they were making money even though they had all this leveraged debt stacked on top of them, I wanted to know what had changed that forced them into bankruptcy. And I also wanted to know what had changed over the last year. They filed for a reorganization Chapter 11, which means we're just going to reorganize our debts, but we're going to stay in business. And all of a sudden, 11 months later, they were shutting down every store. It said it was hopeless and that there was no way back, and that it had changed very significantly. But their sales hadn't changed.
Right.
Their profitability hadn't changed. And so I went looking for articles that could explain it, and I found one that mentioned something called backfloating rate debt. I wanted to know what that meant, and I looked so hard. I went to every financial prospectus I could find. I went to talk to my insiders inside private equity firms. And finally, someone was like, we're really not supposed to talk about this term. It's a really big buzzword. We don't use it. And I said, what is it? And they said, well, it's our norm to use floating rate debt, but it's really become like very untenable. And so we're not supposed to bring it up. It's adjustable rate mortgages.
Right.
It's just stacked on top of a corporation. It's an adjustable rate loan that they leverage onto a corporation. So if this corporation has been plugging along and doing well and having a reasonable standardized growth trajectory, and all of a sudden their debt is going from payments of $6 million a year to $16 million a year, that changes things.
Unsustainable.
Yeah. And I had no idea that there was trillions of dollars in this back-floating rate adjustable debt stacked on top of thousands of corporations all across the United States. And so that's where it started.
Looking at the Joanne Fabrics, that's a great one. I've heard you talk about it on a couple of podcasts, and let's get into that for a moment, because I don't think people understand what's going on here. That it's a repeat of what happened in '08. They just moved the target from one industry to another, correct? And this time it's even more dangerous because it affects everyone and every industry. So kind of walk us through how this happened. What's the process that the investment firms came in to your company or the franchise that you were with, or Joanne Fabrics, or any of the others that are going down? Talk us through that process. How do they do this?
So a lot of people don't understand that when private equity firms, that private equity, first of all, I want to clear up. Private equity is literally the engine that runs America's economy. Any money we don't borrow from the government is private equity. Right. But the private equity I'm talking about are private equity capital investment firms that literally exist only for wealth creation and not to reinvest into the economy. That is what I am talking about. And so when private equity acquires a company, they don't acquire a company the same way you or I acquire something. If I want to buy a car, I have to go down to a car dealership, or I have to go to a bank and take out a loan, and my name is on the bottom line, and I owe the money for that car. I receive the benefit of the use of that car, but I have to make those payments every month. And that's the way it works for any regular human being. When private equity seeks to acquire a company, they have created a mechanism where the car pays for itself and the car owes the money on that loan. And you as a person don't have any liability at all. That car could be off driving through the road, killing people left and right, and I would have no responsibility in the private equity analogy. What happens is it would be like me going to the bank and saying, hey, I have some collateral I want to put up for this loan. And they say, where's your collateral? And I say, I'm going to buy it when you give me the money. Then you can have collateral. That's not how it works for regular Americans, but for private equity, that's how it works. They use the company they're going to acquire as the collateral for the loan they're going to get. And then they don't even take out the loan for themselves. They take it out on behalf of the company they don't even own or have the authority to take out the debt in the name of yet. It's really corrupt, very like convoluted system. And so when they acquire a company, if you go and you say, I'm going to acquire Joann's Crafts, and they're currently traded on the stock market, they say, this is the offer we're making. It's $4 over share price. By law, the shareholders have to take that buyout. The board has to take that buyout because by law, they have to do what's financially best for the shareholders, not the long-term health of the company. And so they take companies oftentimes off the stock market back to private. Once they take that company private, the strip mining begins immediately. So immediately when they get control of a company, they're going to immediately start the process of strip mining the wealth out of that company. And that's going to happen through a number of ways. Almost immediately it will happen through reductions in force. But at the same time that they're reducing the costs of that company, they're going to increase costs simultaneously by appointing themselves as the new management advisors, the new financial advisors, the new growth trajectory advisors. And so suddenly that company now has a contract with the private equity firm, and they owe them hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in advisory fees.
Wow.
Okay. So they're cutting costs over here and increasing costs over here. Then they're going to start targeting the assets. If they have warehouses full of stock, they're going to say, we're going to cut all that down by 90%. They might pass it on to a liquidator. They might force deep discounts, but they're going to offload all of that inventory right away. If they own the real estate that their stores or shops are built on, they're going to immediately sell that real estate. And then they're going to have it like in the contract, they're going to write in what's called a lease back, where prior to this real estate had been the most valuable asset these corporations had, the asset they could rely on in economic downturn as the collateral to take the debt they might need to survive difficult or hard times. And in these circumstances, they sell off all that land, and then they agree to exorbitant leases to lease it back to the stores for X amount of years or until such time as
let me interrupt real quick. This buyback program, though, aren't they? My understanding is that a lot of these firms, they own the investment, or they own the real estate company that they're leasing back to. Correct? Yeah.
Yep. So they're making money on both sides. So they sell off all the land, they lease it back. It takes away any possibility they have of using those assets to survive the next economic downturn. Simultaneously, their real estate investment trust on the other side of the building is getting all of this new land, and they have now a greater asset portfolio they can borrow against. And in the midst of all of this, they are continuing to increase costs for the company while simultaneously cutting services that the company is either able to provide or rely on. Okay? So the strip mining just sort of funnels, and it's like if you brought in a vacuum and just sucked all of the value out of a corporation and funneled it in one direction. That's what they do. Now, unfortunately, it's now come to light that all of this leveraged debt that they are stacking on top of these companies that these companies now own, that they never owed before, is adjustable rate. And over the last few years, we've seen significant increases in our interest rates, which is part of a normal economic flow and cycle, right? And as a result, the monthly payments due on all of this leveraged debt have gone up and up and up and up and up until the companies buckle and break, and there's simply nothing else they can do. It's so easy too, because they're never going to get blamed for it. They're going to say, oh, retail is dying, or oh, consumer spending was down. But if they had never strip mined the wealth out, they would have survived those general market ebbs and flows. At the heart of this loss is still their unethical practices that led to the ultimate demise of these companies.
Yeah, it's interesting in that we've been looking at it for the last 2 years, and we knew that everything was going to come through private equity. We knew that it was going to be a collapse through private equity because we started looking at the housing industry. Zillow was reporting that there were all these foreclosures, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. We couldn't understand where they went. We couldn't understand why these companies, the stock market was doing so well when we knew that some companies were failing. And then we saw companies that were closing. We're going, well, why are they closing? JCPenney was one of the first examples of that, right? They did the exact same thing. They leased out their land. They sold it back. it's one of these issues where we've got the robber barons are out of control. The robber barons of the 1920s have nothing on these guys because they're hitting us from every angle. Let's talk about the effect of this. So it's not just one industry. It's not just retail outlets. It's not just one specific zone. Talk about where this is most likely to hit and all the industries that are involved. Is there anybody that's safe?
Honestly, no. At this point, they're acquiring law firms. They're acquiring major league sports teams. They're acquiring hotels, casinos. But it was really just about 4 years ago during COVID that they turned their attention to a strong focus on small businesses, truly the life's blood of America's economy. A lot of people don't know this, but small business creates 99.8% of all of the jobs in our economy. Yep. These huge corporations are very good at efficiency. They're very good at making money by doing so, by cutting down labor and increasing productivity. They don't create jobs, they eliminate them.
Right.
Small businesses create all of the jobs in our economy and have for about the last 14 to 18 years. Generally, almost all of the jobs. At the same exact time, there is a value survey that's done by Harvard and one other university every year. And they test what people have faith in, what institutions. Right now, for major corporations, we're talking between 8 and 10% faith in them to do the right thing or be ethical, while they have between 65 and 88% faith in small businesses.
Wow.
It was during COVID that they had a big meeting in Sun Valley Billionaire Bunker, Idaho, where it was decided that they needed to invest in small businesses while keeping them looking small. They wanted them to stay looking like a small business, but they wanted to own it and manipulate it. And they also chose very deliberately to invest in the types of companies, the types of business models that we feel emotionally tied to, things that we would emotionally feel the need to continue to pay for, even if it took every penny we had and we had to take on debt. These are things like veterinary care, nursing care facilities for our parents, right, daycare facilities for our kids. These are funeral homes. These are orthodontists. These are the things that we will pay for no matter what the cost. And so, no, I don't believe anything is safe. I don't believe that anything is going to be okay unless we make significant changes to the environment we're currently existing in and the out of control runaway train that private equity has become.
I played your video when I posted it and it took off automatically. And it's interesting. I've been in advertising and marketing my entire life, and when I see that happen, I know that that's hitting a hot spot. People do not share, comment, and like on stuff that they don't care about. This is hitting close to home. I showed the video to my wife. She was slow to come along to all of this. She's a believer, in big government and all of that for years. That why would they do this? Why would they intentionally harm us or destroy the economy? And I've been telling her for years that they don't care. COVID was an eye-opener for her. But after watching your video, I went back downstairs and Tiffany, she was crying. Because when she realized the impact that if these pension funds, and we'll get into that in a moment, how this debt's being sold, but if these pension funds fail, everything's dead, correct?
I mean, right now, we don't have the social safety net necessary to fund our aging population.
Right.
We have a serious deficit in our Social Security fund.
Yep.
And in almost every pension in America, they're underfunded, some of them severely underfunded. Many of them have already been bankrupted by private equity. Apollo Global Management and KKR were created by the bankrupting of hundreds of thousands of pensions. Truly, and in a big, huge forced insurance acquisition in the state of California, they forced the acquisition through the insurance commissioner of California to acquire by force a huge insurance company that had a very strong bond portfolio that was likely to rebound in the next year. And they convinced the insurance commissioner that it was underfunded and he should take it and resell it to them. They promised that every pensioner would get 90 cents on the dollar for what they were going to lose in their investments in that insurance portfolio. They ended up getting about 13 cents.
Wow.
But Apollo Global Management and KKR are now worth trillions of dollars.
Exactly. Well, that's how it works. My dad's pension went through the same thing in the 90s. He'd worked his entire life, and 2 years before retiring, the company comes forward and says, hey, listen, we leveraged your pension against growth. The economy changed. It's gone. And so after working, 30 years at this company, he had nothing to show for it. Let's talk about that. One of the things that these banks do is they don't keep this bad debt on their books for long. Let's talk about how they're getting rid of it.
So just like in 2008, there was, the adjustable rate mortgages were reckless. They were risky, and it was maybe the match, right? And the adjustable rateness of it and the fact that anybody could get a loan, whether or not they were qualified, might have been the timber or the kindling.
Yeah.
But it was the derivative financial products that were literally kerosene and then an atom bomb ultimately. The synthetics were the atom bomb.
Yeah.
When you ask yourself why a bank would make these risky loans, knowing that when a company is acquired by private equity, they are 10 times as likely to go bankrupt. The second time they change hands, they are 23 times as likely to go bankrupt. And I want to say that was 5 years ago. That number has gone up now. We just don't have the new numbers yet. Why would the banks make these loans? Well, the answer is because the banks are going to be made whole almost immediately.
Yep.
They're going to repackage it into other financial products, and they're going to resell it almost immediately to pensions, 401ks, money markets, and it's off their books. They have no liability because private equity has been made whole by all of the dividends they've cut for themselves out of all of the money they've funneled out of the corporation almost immediately, and their management fees they're forcing the corporation to pay, and the land that they've already sold. They are made whole already. The partners in that firm are good. Then the bank offloads all of the debt within sometimes 10 days off their books over to the pensions, the 401ks, and the other products. They're good. But at the end of the day, 10 years from now, when those pensions go to see how that product has performed, because they don't see it for 10 years, that's when we realize that it's all gone to hell.
What would be the impact? I heard Trump talk the other day about closing the carried interest loophole. How much would that affect what these firms are doing?
So right now, private equity is the most sought after investment mechanism that these ultra wealthy individuals are using because they benefit from something called the carried interest loophole, which means that on any amount of money they make through their private equity investments, one, they don't have to hold the product as long as you would in normal investments. So they're able to benefit financially much faster with very little liability. So like normally, let's look back to private equity 20 years ago. Domino's Pizza was saved by Bain Capital. People don't like when I say that sometimes.
Yep.
Domino's Pizza would have gone out of business. It was saved by Bain Capital, which is a private equity fund. Now, Bain Capital back then had to hold that investment for 10 years in order to receive the tax benefits. So they had to have a goal of long-term success for each of those franchisees, or they couldn't realize the tax benefits on those gains. But every president since Carter, with the exception of one president, has actually loosened those restrictions to the point where now they can hold something for as little as 12 months, flip it to the next guy, and get those tax benefits under the carried interest loophole, which means that they don't have to have any vested interest in the long-term success of the companies they acquire. They can strip mine it, flip it, and strip mine it, and flip it, and strip mine it, and flip it, and they'll keep getting money until somebody gets stuck with the hot potato. Every one of them is arrogant enough to think it's not going to be them. But even if it is them and they get stuck with the hot potato, it's not really their problem because they've already dividended out enough to make themselves whole. It's only the pensioners and the smaller investors that get left holding the bag. Closing the carried interest loophole would immediately take away the onus of really the motivation that these investors have to focus on these short-term strategies that are so detrimental to the economic health of our entire country, and force them to start having long-term interest in the companies they're acquiring. It would make it so it wasn't as enticing and certainly not as easy to benefit from without the liability of the bankrupting of 20 or 30,000 locations nationwide and the unemployment of hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask is that, and I don't know if you have this information, but based on what you're seeing and the closures that we've already seen, the ones that are expected in 2025, going into 2026, what's your estimation of how many Americans are going to lose jobs based on these closures?
So the thing that's hard about private equity is that it's private. They literally have, it's a black box.
Right.
And we don't see the bankruptcies until it's too late. We don't see the layoffs until it's too late, which is one of the reasons that this bubble is so scary, right? Is that it can hit us like a train. When you look at the 110 corporations that filed for bankruptcy protection that are acquired by private equity in 2024, a lot of people might look at that and go, oh, it's only 110 companies. We have millions of companies in America. But what you have to understand is that many of these companies that are bankrupt are actually umbrella corporations that own as many as like 30, 40, even 50 brands. And each of those brands might have 1,000 locations. So you start to see exponential losses at that point. If they buy a company that owns 14 retail clothing brands, and each of them has 100 locations, right? You're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of closures. And on top of that, hundreds of thousands of layoffs. And it's impossible to say how many layoffs we're looking at in this term. We do know that at a minimum, we're going to see at least 200,000 layoffs across the ones that we already see in front of us between Party City, Hooters, Joann's. Ultimately, we're seeing Kohl's greatly at risk right now. We're seeing a bunch of Macy's stores closing down. Those are hundreds of thousands. But you have to take that a step further. Anyone who's seen The Big Short knows it's a factual statistic that for every 1% that our unemployment rate goes up, approximately 45,000 Americans lose their lives. That's terrifying. That's not something that we should think is ever an acceptable sacrifice. Second, and I think that this is really important, for anyone that's old enough to have remembered 2008, these are big stores. These are the anchor stores in their parking lots. Anyone who looks back on 2008 remembers what it was like to see the anchor store go out of business in every parking lot in your town. It wasn't the anchor store that hurt. It was the 9 small businesses that relied on that anchor store to bring in their customers. It spiraled and snowballed into a domino effect that just rolled downhill and took out small business after small business after small business.
Well, that's what people don't think about.
It's scary that we have.
I'm sorry, if Costco closes, and I don't think Costco's going to close, but Macy's or JCPenney or whatever, the Joann's Fabrics or whatever store closes, there are people that manage the HVAC there. They're out of business as well now with that company. Right, and they may have a contract for all of the locations in that market. You've got the people the electricians, everything that services that business has now lost revenue as well. That's what happened with me in 2019 or 2020 with COVID. Is that it was this slow bleeding of business away to the point where we can't stay in business, and so that starts to affect the local economy as well. Do you expect anyone in local government, and I'm saying state or federal, to start really looking at this or taking notice? Is it something they can stop?
I'm going to be honest with you. Some of your viewers might not like this. I have a deeply purple channel in my social media channels. I am deep purple. I'm not as red. I'm not as blue. But right now, I think that President Trump, has made a terrible error in firing Alvaro Bedoya and Rebecca Slaughter at the FTC. I honestly, I hope they win their lawsuit for reinstatement. Of every appointment he made, there were some I agreed with. I'm a fan of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Many people know that. He's a friend. I like Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's great. Lena Khan, he should have kept her in office. She was doing the work that he started in his first campaign. A lot of people don't know that. Many of the antitrust lawsuits she was prosecuting successfully started in Donald Trump's first term. And she was doing the work that was necessary. They were reinstating enforcement of the Robinson-Patman Act, especially Alvaro Bedoya's office. The Robinson-Patman Act is the only antitrust law we have that levels the playing field for small businesses. And his specialty in the law was Robinson-Patman. He was the first commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission to actually seek to reinstate and use that antitrust law, not to protect big business, not to protect regular consumers, but to protect the small businesses that keep our economy moving. So we had people in the government that were actively doing it right now. And so I've got to say, I actually genuinely hope they win their lawsuit and get reinstated. I genuinely do, because they were doing the work. I do believe that Trump sees this coming. I believe President Trump sees it's coming. I think that's why he's talking about closing the carried interest loophole. I think he wants to get ahead of how bad this is going to be. And frankly, I think he can see that the populist voters that he has in his coalition don't favor billionaires winning. They need the small working class American to start being listened to, paid attention to, and served again by their government. And so, honestly, that's a huge problem for me. I really believe the Federal Trade Commission was doing the work we needed, and that we need them back to work as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that, politics are definitely playing a role here, and this actions that Musk and Trump have taken, the chainsaw, the hatchet, there are going to be casualties along the way. But hopefully, to your point, people that are working hard, doing the job, and working for the American people and not for themselves, which is what we're trying to stop, right, is something that we've all got to kind of accept, and that things at some point, the ship will right itself. These pension funds, this goes back again. I want to talk about this even more, because this is really, I think, the heart. When you started talking about the pension funds in your video, the people, I don't think people fully understand what that means. Is that's the monthly payment, or the potential monthly payment for people who've worked their entire lives. That potentially, even more than touching individual businesses, this is where these pension funds now touch individual lives, correct?
Yeah. Yes. And most often people that like pensions are few and far between at this point in our economy. It's really unfortunate that we've lost that benefit in many of these very greedy corporations. I actually believe that free market capitalism is an amazing mechanism for allowing people to move between economic strata when it's actually free, and it can see what's happening, and people can respond in a free market way. We don't have that
and
right
there's
now.
there's not fingers on the scale. That's
correct.
Right. That's the issue. There's going to be winners and losers, but if there's no fingers on the scale, I'm good with it. But there's a lot of fingers on the scale right now.
Right now, there's fists on the scale, and they're using lawfare, they're using secret court cases, they're using a lot of non-disparagement clauses, confidentiality agreements. These corporations have really rigged the system so that it's almost impossible to succeed for small businesses, but for everyday consumers. And so there's not a lot of pensions that exist for the younger generation, right? There's not. Right. But for people that have pensions right now, most of them were public servants. Either they worked for utilities, or they worked for railroads, or they worked as crane operators, or they worked as teachers, or they worked in their local government, or they were garbage men. Right. These are people that worked for 30 years to get a pension, were given the promise that they were investing their money into their pension and it would be waiting for them when they got there. And that is the safety net they had. It's the only savings they had. Right. And so for many of these people with these underfunded pensions, they're literally facing what could be a total loss of the value of what's left in their retirement accounts. And when those pensions go unfunded, the only people left to pick up that check are the taxpayers. And I think that that's intentional here. I believe that these bankers and investors know that we're never going to allow the banks to be too big to fail again. We're not going to allow them to bail out the banks. But we will absolutely have to allow them to bail out our grandmother. And I think that there's a lot of intent there.
Well, one of the questions I had for you is this an accident? Or was it done by design? It sure doesn't look like an accident to me with all of the different channels.
Yeah, I would not say that this was an accident. I would not even say that it was an accidental inevitability. They're going to say so. They're going to say we couldn't predict that interest rates were going to go up. Interest rates always go up eventually. Right. That's how the economic cycle works. That's what they're going to say. They're going to say we couldn't have predicted it. You could absolutely predict that if you sold their real estate, they wouldn't have any fallback plan in an economic downturn, which would inevitably come. But what I can say for sure is that every time one of these companies does go bankrupt, do you know who benefits the most?
Who's that?
The other private equity firms. Because then they come in and they buy off the assets and it starts over again.
Right.
Right now, Joanne's assets were just bought by another private equity firm. right now, 23andMe is going bankrupt today. And do you know who's going to buy that data? A private equity firm. And they're going to own our genetic data and they're going to monetize it.
Yep.
Just on the intellectual property. And God knows where they're going to sell it to and what they will do with it.
These are the things that scare me. What can we do? Tiffany, I mean, you've worked in politics. You've been watching this for the last several years. What are our options? What does the average Joe do?
First of all, for the average Joe, for you, the person in your shoes you're standing in right now, the best way to fight private equity in your community is to shop small, to go out of your way and forfeit convenience in favor of your community. It is the hardest thing in the world to do, to drive to a butcher shop and then to drive to a cheesemonger and then a local hardware store, when we've become so beholden to the necessity for convenience. They keep us so busy, so tired, so scared, so divided all the time that we don't have the time to serve one another anymore. We have to fight and combat that terrible, terrible pull. And you have to go and you have to serve your small businesses. You have to support them, because all of these private equity acquired companies at one time were small businesses.
Yep.
And when they were small businesses, they were sponsoring soccer teams, and they were sponsoring hockey leagues, and they were sponsoring Girl Scout troops. And then at one point,
And they lived in the communities. And they lived in the communities that they serviced. So they knew the people that they were helping out. The people in the community knew who they were. That has all changed. And sadly, the big box stores, what you were talking about is going to the cheesemonger or going to the butcher shop. That's great in a big city, but if you go to a small community, generally all they have is a Dollar General or a Walmart. So what are the options there?
Yeah.
You know, we're really running out of
So for
opportunities.
everyone, I encourage you. For everyone, regardless of where you are, I encourage you to let Donald Trump, our president, know that you support him closing the carried interest loophole immediately. That is something that he needs the win in his sails to do. We have to give him the runway to do the hard thing. Because let me tell you, every donor he has is going to fight to stop this. Every single one. That anyone that can afford to donate the max is going to fight him on this. We have to give him the runway he needs to do the hard thing. And we have to say that not only do we want it, but we demand it. At the same time, we need to be advocating for antitrust litigation. We need to be, and a lot of people don't know this, antitrust laws are the only criminal laws in the United States considered so essential to the survival of our economy that any American is allowed to bring an antitrust case. Most people don't know that. The DOJ doesn't have to do it. The FTC doesn't have to do it. Anyone can do it. If your attorney general is willing, you should be advocating with your attorney general to bring antitrust cases to support the small businesses in your state and your community. But right now, you need to shop small. It's Small Business We Trust. You need to tell President Trump that right now we need him to close the carried interest loophole. We need to demand that the Federal Trade Commission actually enforce the Robinson-Patman Act and our antitrust laws, that they need to see those litigations through. And we have to demand that our politicians stop putting the needs of billionaires and monopolists ahead of the everyday Americans, because it is draining and strip mining the life's blood out of whatever is left of the middle class and the working class of this country.
Do you think that these private equity firms and companies such as BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street that are so controlling of our complete economy in every aspect, should they be broken up?
Yes. Yes, they should. But I don't know if you've seen my videos on this. I can tell you why BlackRock won't be broken up.
Why is that?
It might break your heart. So my husband is a federal attorney. My husband is a federal attorney.
Okay.
And I happen to have access to the federal pension. Every single federal, current and former federal employee, from the president down to the janitor that has ever worked for our federal government, 81% of the federal pension, including the golden parachute pensions at the top, are managed by BlackRock. 81% of every dollar. Trillions and trillions of dollars of the federal pension are entirely managed by BlackRock. The remaining 19% is managed by State Street. But yes, they do need to be broken up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. I think that they're the most dangerous thing. That's what I noticed during COVID is that when the stores started closing and they started, mask mandating and everything, I couldn't understand initially how that happened because in competition, at least one store would stay open. One store would say, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to allow our, and none of them did it. And so I started looking at, Lowe's is owned by BlackRock. Home Depot is owned by BlackRock. Kroger is owned by BlackRock. And when you find out that there's only 12, 13 people that own everything in this nation, or 12, 13 major companies that own.
And BlackRock is owned by
Vanguard.
BlackRock is owned by Bank of America. 46% of their ownership is Bank of America.
Yep. And they all own each other.
Don't know that.
You've got Moynihan over there. It's an incestuous.
They all own each other.
It's an incestuous situation, and the only way that we get this clawed back is to break it up. We had to break up companies. People go, well, you can't do that. Well, they broke up AT&T. Now they regrouped and they came back as a different entity, but they broke them up because of what was happening. There's too much power, too much control in the hands of too few people. And everybody talks about the rich and the billionaires and the millionaires. I don't care about that. I care about the people who have influence and have an agenda that they want to change or alter my life and how I live. You feel the same?
Yes, I do. And I want to be really clear. Right now, we have a problem in that our existing antitrust laws are incapable of successfully doing the work that needs to be done because our existing antitrust laws were explicitly written with regard to price fixing for consumers. It never conceived, the writers of those laws never conceived of a world where the monopolists would not be passing along any cost to consumers, that they would be governing everything without having any say in pricing directly. They never conceived of a world where social media would be free to consumers, but they would be creating a pricing cartel for small businesses. Antitrust law says consumers, not small businesses. And so we have a problem where our legislators are incapable of doing the work that is necessary in our gridlock Congress to actually pass the laws we need to properly break up these companies. We have a legislative bureaucracy that is so beholden to these billionaires, they are incapable of doing anything for their actual voters. We have a judicial branch that is becoming so volatile and so divided and so, I don't like to say politically active, but they have become that way in a tremendous amount of our legal system, that they are incapable of focusing on those issues. We have to demand more. We have to demand that fairness is reinstated for America. We have to demand that the working class and the small business owners and the middle class are heard and represented. It's not going to be comfortable. It's going to be difficult, but it's essential.
Yeah, I think we're at a crossroads in the country, and there's been this push so long that, the rich control everything. You have no voice. Well, the same things were said in Rome 2,000 years ago, right? Nothing has changed. It's always gets to this point, but it's gotten so bad in this country. The corruption is so bad that everyone sees it. And I think it's interesting to see that, Trump is good, Trump is bad. Depending on how you look at it, everybody's got some kind of input. But what I like to see is that Trump is the first president in my lifetime to bring so many people from so many diverse backgrounds and political ideologies together to solve the problem. And I think that's what we need. Is RFK the answer? Is he going to make it happen? I don't know, but I have faith. Right? I'm hoping that changing what we've been doing will at least move us in the right direction. And that's the same thing with our finances and everything else. And to your point, it's going to be an uphill battle. It's not going to, the people that are benefiting from the current status quo will not change anything. Doesn't benefit them. So why would they? They're going to fight us all the way. So besides the loophole, and do you think that reaching out, do you think that being vocal on social media and in petitions and so on, is Trump paying attention to that? Is the Trump administration paying attention to the voice of the people, do you think?
There is one thing I know about President Donald J. Trump, and that is that he lives on social media And he is always paying attention to what the trends say is popular. He tries to steer those trends very vocally. There is no question. But if we are loud enough and consistent enough for long enough, we can get anything done except the Epstein files released.
Yeah, that seems to be the holdup. I have some insights on that. I have some inside information, and I'll give you some good news. It's because indictments are being prepared. It's not because they're holding off and they're dragging their feet. There's a lot of people involved here.
I hope you're right.
I'm super excited about it. Tiffany, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or get more information about what you're doing and the kind of content you're producing?
So on TikTok, I'm at Tiffany Cianci. On YouTube, I'm at Tiffany Cianci. On Instagram and X, I am the Vino Mom. And I post my content everywhere. So, you can find me where you are.
Well, I'm so glad I found you. A friend of mine sent me your content, and I was so glad about it. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's one more thing that we can demand that would make a huge difference. And that is that we need to demand that our legislators pass a law that makes it unlawful for these corporations to amass huge segments of the single-family housing market.
I agree. I've been looking for a house for the last 4 years.
That is a place where everything's being manipulated, and we can make a difference there if we demand it. And that is one more law that we should be advocating for.
Tiffany, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
We'll be back again soon. See you then.
Thank you for watching Kramer Says Live.
This concludes this broadcast.
Please follow, like, and subscribe to be notified the next time
The CramerSez project goes live.